Today we're going to look at why ethical people can make unethical decisions and how organizations can end up promoting unethical activity. There is a pressure and a reward for risk-taking, for finding new ways of doing things, new ways that often bend the rules or find clever ways to stay just within the rules. Tax legislation is a good example. Tax rules are changed with the intent of achieving certain outcomes, but before the ink is even dry, tax lawyers are working diligently to find the loopholes that will allow for tax avoidance, but not tax evasion. If you want an insider's breakdown of how this game is played, it's very interesting to read the book by Norman Bacall, Breakdown, the inside story of the rise and fall of Hainan Blakey. He demonstrates the lengths that they would go to and the extra value that they are able to deliver by pushing the boundaries between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax avoidance is ethical, while tax evasion is illegal. Unfortunately, the line between avoidance and evasion is broad and very gray. We all have our own opinion of how ethical a tax lawyer's work is, but there is little doubt, especially if you read the book, that he and his clients were richly rewarded for pushing the boundary. The problem before us is that there is no universally agreed on identification of what really is unethical behavior. While at the extremes, people with a common cultural upbringing can often agree on whether a behavior is ethical or unethical, there is a broad gray zone in the middle that is open to interpretation. Within that zone, each individual and organization will draw a different but completely defendable line between what is ethical and unethical behavior. One of the impacts of this is that individuals in an organization may have different expectations relating to the ethics of different business decisions. Different people in the organization will have different tolerances for making decisions that are close to the line or push the bubble. Some managers, as an example, may be comfortable making a statement that they know will be difficult to deliver on, while others will only promise what's easily delivered. Another example, different project managers may be more or less comfortable pushing out deliverables that may have quality issues just to stay on time and on budget. These differences can create conflicts between individuals and groups within an organization. As we mentioned at the beginning, unethical or close to unethical behavior can pay, and depending on the specific incentives, it may pay pretty big. People who are comfortable with pushing the envelope relative to an organization's ethical guidelines are often able to perform at a higher level and achieve more and larger desired outcomes. So, how does this work out in the day-to-day operations of an organization? In theory, an organization's ethical standards are well defined and well established, and then the line between ethical and unethical behavior will be quite bright, easy to evaluate, and easy to maintain. Unfortunately, in most organizations, ethical lines are vague and ethical enforcement can be erratic. This means that individuals and groups will have incentives to push the boundaries to maximize success. Over time, this has the impact or the effect that behavior that was previously considered close to the line starts to become normalized. The line is slowly moved as people in the organization accept the new behavior as a standard and then push beyond it. While this may initially seem like an overreaching statement, this means that every organization is always placing its people under unremitting pressure to push the boundaries. Employees and corporations desiring to be successful create this pressure. This isn't like gravity where all organizations feel the same pull. Different industries will have different pressures. A company with a very aggressive management team and working in a highly competitive industry will face significant pressure. But even an old-school utility working in a regulated environment will be at risk from individual employees acting unethically to succeed and advance within the organization. While unremitting, this pressure can be quite subtle. It might show up at a sales meeting where individual comments are made that we need to do everything we can to win this. It can show up in a project meeting where there's pressure to cut corners to stay on time and on budget. Each small action moves the bar a bit. Over time, the bar can move quite a distance without anyone noticing. What would have raised eyebrows 6 months or a year ago become normal, standard operating practices. New, less ethical behavior is now accepted and rationalized. Everyone's doing it. It may be questionable, but we need to do it if we want to succeed. And anyway, it's not illegal. Well, it may be illegal here, but everyone does it there, and if we aren't prepared to play by their rules, then we might as well just go home. And each time the bar moves down another notch. Government and public agencies may have different drivers, but they are not immune from this effect. There is always a conflict between behaving politically and behaving in a nonpartisan manner. There is always uncertainty around public interest and the interests of individuals working in the government sphere. In many ways, the ethical boundaries in governments are especially broad and especially gray. So, if this force is always present in public and private organizations, how do we combat it? And how do we maintain an organization's ethical standards and practices? The first thing we need to recognize is this is a long game. We can't succeed by handing a new employee our code of conduct document and then ignoring ethical considerations in all day-to-day and strategic decision-making. Ethical considerations need to be built into everything the organization does. There are 6 factors that affect the pressures to act unethically. They are personal integrity, social integrity and culture, corporate culture, governance structures, regulations, and finally laws. Every company, whether they think about it or not, maintains a somewhat delicate balance between these factors and the pressures to push boundaries to succeed. If you set the bar too high, then the company risks losing capital, clients, employees, and momentum as other groups and companies outcompete and outmaneuver them. But set the bar too low, and you risk the distractions that comes from fighting legals and reputational battles around ethical situations. The balance needs to be recognized, measured, and sometimes adjusted to avoid negative ethical issues that can have large costs and subject the organization to reputational damage. Let's spend a minute looking at each of these factors. The first, personal integrity. Individuals have a personal definition of what constitutes ethical behavior, and they have a personal comfort level with acting close or beyond that line. People with high personal integrity are honest and have strong moral principles. They will often be the first to speak up if corporate decisions are being made that test the ethical boundaries of the organization. But there is an important distinction to make. We need to recognize that integrity is not related to where a person draws the ethical line, but how brightly they draw an ethical line. In other words, integrity is related to the consistency of action rather than to a particular level of ethical behavior. Number 2, social integrity and culture. Culture and cultural norms set the behavioral boundaries that an organization can operate in. In most instances, they form a stable base that provides a consistent framework for a corporation's ethical behavior. However, today there's another, less well-defined and far less stable agency that provides what we call social license. This is social media. Relatively small groups of people with special interests can use social media to expand their reach and drastically impact an organization's level of ethical behavior. Whether or not you believe this is a good thing, its power to monitor ethical behavior and impact how an organization makes ethical decisions needs to be considered in any evaluation of ethical risk. Third, corporate culture. Corporate culture is the shared belief of all members of the organization based on shared experience and a shared historical story. It sets expectations around ethical behavior that are fairly stable and pretty difficult to change. This means that the definition of ethical behavior will change slowly, and while a boundary between ethical and unethical behavior may drift, the movement will be limited and slow. This does not mean that corporate culture promotes ethical behavior. Some corporate cultures promote risk-taking and success at all costs. This type of corporate culture can magnify the pressures to act unethically and result in rapid acceptance of unethical practices. Fourth, governance structures. Governance refers to the definition of roles, responsibilities, and authority in the organization. Distributed authority can make it easier for people to make unethical decisions, while governance structures with many checks and balances can make it more difficult. Few organizations consider the maintenance of ethical behavior as a key consideration when they're defining their governance structures. Fifth, regulations. One can think of regulations as existing to define the public good, and many regulations are related to defining and enhancing ethical behavior from society's perspective. A good regulatory environment can form a foundation for strong ethical behavior in a regulated environment or organization. A weak regulatory environment, on the other hand, can provide loopholes that reward the organization that is creative and has a culture or a governance structure that supports ethically pushing the boundary. Finally, laws. Laws relating to ethical behavior generally exist to protect individuals from unethical actions by people in a position of trust. It is interesting that while laws are the strongest form of ethical enforcement, many individuals and organizations still make unethical decisions that lead to legal action. While one might quickly conclude that this suggests that in many organizations the incentive to act unethically are really strong, there is another factor at play. While it's too complex to go into here, the way people and groups make decisions allow risky and illegal decisions to be rationalized and acted upon. Altogether, these factors represent all of the levers that can be used and adjusted by an organization to measure, evaluate, and manage ethical decision-making. Organizations have the most control over the personal integrity of the people they hire, the governance structures that define operations and decision-making, and finally, the corporate culture that the organization operates within. From a corporate perspective, in maintaining an ethical organization, the critical aspect is to align all of these factors. These factors do not operate independently of each other. Any ethical risk in an organization must be evaluated across all of these factors, and changes must be applied in a way where each factor reinforces the others in achieving the desired goal. In some cases, a short-term fix, such as firing a person who has breached a code of conduct, is appropriate and is going to protect the organization. But in other cases, a breach of the code of conduct may only indicate that there are deeper problems within the corporate culture, governance structure, or maybe even the organization's mission statement that need to be addressed to maintain an ethical organization. While it doesn't have to become all-encompassing, any company that doesn't recognize and manage this environment is substantially increasing their corporate risk. I'm guessing you as an individual would be shocked and expect action to be taken when an employee makes unethical decisions and acts in an unethical manner. Similarly, I'm going to argue that you should be shocked by a management team that ignores monitoring, measuring, and possibly moderating the ethical environment of the organization. In the end, they both lead to the same place, greater and greater risk that unethical activities will be undertaken in the name of the organization. If you want a little more background on this, Tyra's new Ethical Decision Workshop provides an understanding of how ethical and unethical decisions are made and what can be done to reduce ethical risk and create an ethical organization, whatever your definition of that is. It puts into focus the way people make decisions in the real world and provides an understanding of how that impacts their ability to make ethical decisions. It then focuses that knowledge on evaluating strengths and weaknesses in the organization and leads to an action plan for improving the ethical environment of the organization. If you have anything to add to this discussion, please add them in the comments below. And if you'd like additional information, visit our website or email us at info@tyrastrategies.com. As usual, like or subscribe since we promise not to deliver videos on a regular schedule. Hit the bell to be notified about the next one. Bye for now.